All right, so thank you very much for joining me today. How is South Africa during this time of COVID?
At the moment, it's not going great.
Yeah.
There's quite a bit of protests happening in the country.
Mm,
There's In the wake of COVID, there's a lot of poverty.
mm,
So people are desperate for
yeah.
food and
Mm,
money. So it's been a hectic week in South Africa. We've also entered our third lockdown period. Um, so
yeah.
it's we're managing, but there's a lot of people in the country who
We hope
aren't
that
managing.
the situation is not going to become worse, but change for the better.
Yep.
Yeah. So thank you for joining me again. We are basically discussing this the CMS Africa, the CMS community. The CMS community in Africa. And basically, when we talk about CMS, we're talking about the major CMSs, the WordPress of this world, the Drupals, Joomla, and the new entrants. But then, of course, to start, I would like you to tell us who you are, what you do down there in South Africa, all about your involvement with WordPress and Woocommerce. Yeah.
Um, so my name is Job. I'm originally from Belgium, but I've been living in South Africa for almost 8 years now.
Yeah.
I moved here in 2013. Not at all related to technology, but to
Yeah.
to follow the woman I love here. So I think about a year after I arrived, I started working for Woocommerce, uh, or Woocommerce back in the day.
Yeah.
First as an educational training manager, which focused on educating customers, teaching also the internal team, helping with onboarding and internal training. And then about just short of a year after I started there, we were acquired by a company called Automatic, which is the company behind WordPress.com and Tumblr and Jetpack. And after that, I became a team lead of happiness engineers, which is what we call our people in support. And since about a year now, I've been the head of that division. So the WooCommerce happiness
Yeah.
engineers, there's
Yeah.
about 80 of us. They're part of the division I run.
So tell me, what do you think is the leaps and bounds that WooCommerce has, from the time it started as WooThemes and what it is now?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is, it started as WooThemes and now it is WooCommerce. Can you tell us the process, what it was then and what it is now, the changes that have taken place? Yeah.
I mean, the biggest change to start focusing on WooCommerce was something that happened before I joined the company. WooThemes itself started with 3 people, AD, Mark, and Magnus, who at the times were all 3 living in different places. I think Mark was living in the UK at the time, Magnus in Norway, and AD in South Africa here. They saw each other's work, which was in theme development in WordPress, liked each other's work and what they were doing. So they reached out, decided to bundle their forces and started a company called WooThemes. And then they started realizing that a lot of people were asking about e-commerce functionality in their theme. So they hired 2 guys to focus on that full time to look into what that would look like, which resulted in a plugin being built called WooCommerce. And that's become very fast the major success point of the company and the business, because lots of people are wanting to add some form of e-commerce functionality to their website, and WooCommerce makes that easy.
Okay. Okay. Basically, when we are talking, thank you for that. When we are talking about the CMS community, we are talking about majorly web development. All right. So down there in, say, in South Africa, what is your experience with how people build website? Do they use CMS? Do they build from scratch? Do they do hard coding?
Well, I mostly have experience with the WordPress community. So from my perspective, there's a lot of CMS use, but I've also just looked at the stats, and in South Africa, the CMS community is fairly well established. I think the bigger websites try to do mostly in-house development. But there's loads of people who use a CMS for building their own website, and also some bigger companies are starting to realize that that's the easiest way to build something that's sustainable in the long run, and that you don't need an entire team of developers to maintain.
But do you think they're correct when they talk about that if they want to develop something perhaps that is scalable and bigger, then the best way is not to go with the CMS? There's lots, there are stories that, these CMSs can do anything. When you talk about Drupal, they say that it's an enterprise. Typo 3 says it's enterprise. I mean, CMS, WordPress says that now it's enterprise. I mean, do you think that they're incorrect in saying that?
So I'm obviously biased because I work in the WordPress community. I definitely think that WordPress can work on an enterprise level. I think there's also advantages of using WordPress on an enterprise level, just like there are Drupal and Joomla and Typo 3 and so on. The downside of building something from scratch is that you depend a lot on whoever built it. So if they suddenly decide to leave the company, you're stuck with a lot of legacy code, a lot of unclarity on what to do next. If something breaks, it's also difficult to find a team to help fix it. You're fully dependent on whatever is done within your company. So someone external to come in and fix something is a lot more difficult because they don't know the system. And with the established CMSs, you don't have that problem. You have loads of people who can come in and even for a temporary job work on your website.
Okay. Of course, you say, I'm using your own words, that you are biased towards WordPress. WordPress started as a blogging system, and now talking town is that it has gone enterprise. It's good, it can do anything. What do you think are the changes that they have made over the years to make it scalable, to make it more robust, sort of?
That's a very broad question. I think so. It definitely started as a blogging system. That's also how I first used WordPress. I built my own personal blog in 2007 on WordPress.com. That's how I started with it, and we started building a website for another project in 2010. With a friend of mine, we wanted to do like a culture review website, and we did a lot of venturing around, testing a few things. We ended up paying a developer company to build it for us, and it was a mission to work with. I remember having to write I think it was 23 or 24 pages of a manual just to explain to people how to write a blog post. And I think 5 months after we launched it, that friend of mine and I started looking into WordPress and figuring out that it was a lot easier to maintain everything and to make it accessible for all people who want to get involved. And I think that's one of the strengths of a CMS, that whatever you use as the default. So for example, with WordPress, that's the blogging platform was at the core. It was pages and posts, but that same principle, the same structure has been used for all sorts of different what we call custom post types, which uses the same structure as posts and pages, but adds a few features to it. For example, you have events plugins that could make the post type into an event, which adds the location. WooCommerce uses post types for the product pages, for the orders, for the customers. So from that starting point of focused on blogging, you can fairly easily build a whole system that works very similar, to what you know already, the pages and the posts, but allows you to add a lot of functionality. And I think that ease of use, and that's also improved a lot. So maybe I should highlight that. In the last few years, we've seen a lot of focus within WordPress on making the editor more accessible. In the WordPress community is known as the Gutenberg project, but externally we refer to it as a block editor, where we have tried to make it as simple as possible for people to add different blocks of text, whether it's a paragraph, an image, a slider, a product. Those things are easier to insert in a post and a page, but also inside the custom post types.
Okay, let's talk about where you work now, Woocommerce. And originally, when WordPress was built, there was no Woocommerce, correct? And then it was introduced later. And one of the things that people, and obviously we are going to be talking about speed and loading right now, you know, vis-a-vis what. So people say that that Woocommerce can slow down websites, right? Because of the number of assets that it adds to an already to a website. Do you know, when you're working with as somebody who is working with WooCommerce, do you know some of the things that people can do, developers can do, to make sure that that WooCommerce does not drag your website?
Question, and one that I think in the end you'll probably need a bit of an individualized view on. Yeah. But the challenge is that when it comes to websites, so people have their physical stores, they pay for the building or the rent. I mean, either they own it or they rent it. They'll pay to have a nice coat of paint. They'll have bought a cash register. They have nice shelving. They will, based on the seasons, decorate it differently. And in the end, in a physical store, you'll end up spending quite a bit of money in maintaining the store. However, for some reason, when it comes to websites, people don't have that mindset. It needs to be as cheap as possible and no maintenance whatsoever, but that's just not realistic. In that regard, I think a website still stays a lot cheaper than a physical store, but there's also a level of maintenance. And the question on speed and load times has a lot to do with the amount of money and time and energy you're willing to invest in it. Out of the box, WooCommerce runs fine on a cheap hosting plan. If you don't, I mean, I have an active test site somewhere which doesn't use this very special hosting, has a cheap plan attached to it, and it runs fine. But we have very few orders. From my perspective, it's more of a testing environment. The goal is not to sell. But if you have thousands of people visiting the same page, or if you on Cyber Monday or Black Friday have a special and you've got hundreds of people going through a checkout at the same time, you suddenly, where you would have had a lot of bandwidth on your hosting platform, you suddenly have a concentration of so many people going through the same route, and that results in an issue. But that's also the case with websites that don't use CMSs on special sales. They at those times need extra resources. They need their hosting partner to help them with it. So I think there's a few things to bear in mind. First of all, where you host matters a lot, and I can't emphasize that enough. That going for a reliable hosting partner, especially as you scale up, is a key aspect. You need to find a host that knows WooCommerce and has optimized its servers for running WooCommerce, and ideally also have a hosting platform that allows you to customize the traffic you want, that it's not dependent on, say, if you do shared hosting and there's 100 other websites in your package, and suddenly you have 5 of the other websites demanding a lot of traffic, and you're stuck with the leftovers. The other one is to also try to not use anything that you don't need. There's a lot of websites, when we look at the troubleshooting, they are so feature heavy, and everything needs to have a separate feature and a separate plugin. And the more you add to your website, the slower it becomes. That's logical. The more space you would add to your, or the more things you would add to your physical stores, the less option you have for maneuvering fluently in that. So whenever you build it, I think it's always a good question to ask yourself, is this really necessary? Is this going to help my website? And when you do decide this is important to use, also to try pay for the more the better extensions and plugins. If you go for free or cheap extensions, the chances are that you're going with a provider who hasn't built the code well, or isn't that reliable in terms of support. So those are a few of the tips I would give. When you start growing your store, at some point you will need a dedicated person or maybe even team in the long run to make sure that it runs smoothly. We on Woocommerce.com, on a meta level, we run Woocommerce, so we sell our extensions via Woocommerce, but we have a team of, I forgot what it is now, but I think we have 8 developers working full-time on Woocommerce.com. Yeah. They're adding features, but they're also making sure that the website runs smoothly. So I would highly recommend that building a team around your website is important as your business grows.
Right. So let's talk about CMSs in general and the African continent. What do you think? What is the community like in South Africa? You said that you're very, you know a little more of the community of WordPress than the rest of the other CMSs. How is it like? How does it operate in South Africa?
So we first of all are also struggling with COVID. So, well, we used to have a lot of meetups in, I don't know how many, at least in 3, but I think there's more cities in South Africa that have meetups, both the WooCommerce or the WordPress meetups. So those would be great places to go to. There's also WordCamps, so annual events where people come together from the WordPress community. And those events are normally quite well attended. Again, COVID has not been friendly to those meetups. There's been a few attempts at something more online, but that hasn't been as successful. The other side of it is that as people experience lockdown and suddenly they aren't allowed to open their stores or their restaurants anymore, we've seen a lot of people not necessarily panic, but at least get nervous about making sure that they have an online presence. So we've seen a growth in the amount of people that want to have a website on one hand, but then also people who buy online on the other hand. Because if you're not allowed to go to a store, or you're worried about becoming sick through going to a store, you're much more tempted to go and buy online. So the growth of e-commerce in Africa, but also worldwide in the last year, has been tremendous in comparison to the years before that.
Okay, so you don't. But do you have any conversation with the other communities like Drupal, like yeah?
Like I used to enjoy. I mean, I've been part of the CMS Africa community for quite a few years now. Yeah. I was thinking, I think the first one I went to was in 2015, so that's 6 years ago. And it's been great seeing and connecting to those other CMSs. I think there's a big space for open source software, even though there's a lot of competition from closed source systems as well. I would say that maybe especially in open source should have a prominent spot, because it allows people to start with a very small budget and has much more of that adaptability to the environment. Yeah. A lot of the closed source systems don't allow building that much on top of it. So you don't have that limitation with a open source system. If if you, for example, live in Nigeria and there's a shipping or a fulfillment company that works quite well, if they have an API built, you can connect it to your WooCommerce store and start using them. You don't need to wait for WooCommerce to approve this. We have an open API. You can use it, and you can build your local tool for that. The same goes for translations. If you want to have things translated into Swahili, you can go ahead and do that. You can join the WordPress community if you would use WordPress and start translating. You don't need to wait for some business guy in the States to make a decision that let's translate this into one of the African languages. You can just go ahead and do it and contribute to it.
Right. So
Go
ahead.
I was also going to say, if you start noticing that due to and that's one of the things we focused on a lot, when internet speeds on average are slower here in South Africa, or there's many more people using mobile than desktop, you can start contributing to that. You can start helping make sure that the CMS runs smoothly on mobile with slower internet. And again, you're not dependent on some person in Canada to make a decision that this is necessary.
All right, so thank you very much, Mr. Yop. We're just finishing, but before we finish, of course, I would ask you to tell us your last word for people who are developing and using Woocommerce in Africa. What are some of the things that you could tell them that are new in some of the updates you've done, what is going on? Yeah.
I would highly recommend to start getting involved with the community if you're a CMS user and developer. It's tempting, I think, at first to focus almost purely on using the tools, and I think that's normal. That's also how I started. I used WordPress. I didn't even know that there was a big community behind it, but I think you learn a lot by helping others out, whether that's on the support side, helping out in the forums, helping listening to what others have to say, translating, building parts of the core product, building extensions. I think there's a lot of things that you can contribute to the CMS that you work with, or the CMSs you work with, that ultimately help build it stronger. And the stronger the core CMS, the better the community around it, and the better the websites run around it. So I would highly recommend to get involved with the CMS you have. And from a personal perspective, I started with the translations and the support side of things. But since then, I've been able to make my own contributions into WooCommerce core, into WordPress core, and it's also a pretty cool thing knowing that even if it's like, I think I wrote for WordPress core two or three lines of CSS, but knowing that millions of websites have that little bit of code you wrote is a pretty empowering feeling. It's pretty cool to have that.
Yeah.
And that's something you obviously don't have with closed systems. There's no way that you can write something that suddenly is available to everyone. So that's a very, I often make the comparison between Apple and WordPress in that sense. I like Apple products. I think they run smoothly. I think they're user-friendly, but there's no part of me in Apple. There's nothing of me that's inside this product. I just like it. With WordPress, that's different. I like WordPress, but it's not just that I like it. I'm also critical to some parts of it, but it also has a part of me. I'm invested in the product because I've helped build it. And I think that's where open source differs a lot from closed source systems.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much, Mr. Yop. I think our interview went on very well, no glitches, no nothing. So thank you very much. And again, thank you for your support during CMS Africa Summit, in the community, and everything that you've done so far.